Okay, now I'm going to clean up this chassis from this Corgi ElectroRocket that we just removed the motor and the front wheels from. It's looking pretty gunky, so what I'm using here is a domestic limescale remover. This particular one is called, you can see that, Viacal. Bleach won't work with this. Strength of this depends on how bad the corrosion is on the. I'm going to use sort of half and half really. So that's the solution. Just put some water in it. So we're just going to drop this into the solution, and as you can see it's fizzing away nicely. So we leave this in the solution for as long as it sort of reaction is taking place. It could be a couple of hours. We could leave it overnight. Once the solution has stopped working, we'll take this out and we'll clean it with some clean water, and then the chassis is then ready for some final cleaning with some wet and dry paper. Okay, before we take the motors apart, it's a good idea to, well, it's actually very important, to remember which way round the casing is fixed. This is the top of the motor with the contact that were released with the soldering iron, or it may be released by corrosion. So the reason behind this is that once this motor is apart, there's no coloured, the magnets inside aren't coloured like in the Sizzler's card to actually identify which way up the motor runs. Now you can make a mental note by just looking at the condition of the casing, so you know that the grotty side is on the lower, on the underneath. But say for on this one, it could be either way. Once you get this cap off, you're not quite sure which. So you could make a mark, you could put a sticker on to say, you know, that's the top of the motor, so you always know that that is the way round it comes off and goes back on again. The other one is quite grotty underneath but quite shiny on the top, so that sort of marks itself. But this one, for example, once you get this end cap off, you just wouldn't know. And if you get the motor casing on the wrong way round, the car's going to run backwards, unfortunately. So just a very important point, this to say, to make sure that you know which is the top and which is the bottom. Okay, this is the good ElectroRocket motor that we moved from the car a little bit earlier. In order to actually take this motor apart, there are two tabs, one here, which we have to bend back, and then this end cap, the black plastic piece, will come away, and we'll be able to see inside and be able to work out what's going on with this motor and why it stopped working. So we'll just get our screwdriver in here to bend this back. And this one. Hopefully you'll be able to see inside. Now I don't expect you're going to be able to see much from where you are. It's difficult enough for me. But it all seems to be intact. I think it just needs cleaning. It's just completely mucky in here. I think I might need to draw you a diagram, because I think this is so tiny, which is why they're very difficult to work on. To describe what exactly is going on inside here. Right, so we're taking the motor apart for the ElectroRocket, and we're just looking at the inside the business end, shall we say, of the motor that we've taken off. And I've had to draw this diagram because this is just so very tiny. This end cap here, blown up many times. What you'll see inside is, if it's in good condition, this is the hole where the axle goes for the motor. These are the two brush windings which are on the top and bottom. That's the contact that was soldered onto the chassis, so that's the top one. And what you will see is the brush winding, it's sort of pinched in this corner with this contact which runs on the outside of the motor. These two here on the other side of this, on the other side with this capping. So they're basically just pinched in place, and then this winding goes round and round and round and round, and it comes down, and that's the top brush, or the more technically, I suppose, that is the negative terminal brush. This is the positive one, which is the one which is attached to the actual motor casing itself. And again, this is pinched by this terminal here, and it goes round and round and round and round, and then so when you take the motor apart, these all sort of spring back into this position here. So you need to make sure that these two are actually present. On this one, so it stopped working. They are actually still there, and I think what's happened is they're just so mucky with gunk that they're just not, electricity is just not getting through, so I'm just going to clean it up and hopefully it'll work again. So if these are missing or broken, the motor isn't going to work. So you're going to have to replace these brushes, which is not impossible. So what I was going to show you, which I couldn't actually find it, and I've put it somewhere else, but I've now found it, is that you can replace these, but it's very fiddly. There's one here, which I know you can't see. I've actually taken the brushes off of this motor. This is not a Sizzler's motor. I think this has come off a Scalextric's car or something. I've got a couple of these, and the brush windings are a little bit heavier, but they look about the same material, and they have like a flat profile. So basically, I took one of these motors apart and cut this brush winding material off, and I started to I've done one on here. I'm going to do another one. So that is an option. What it means is that you get a length of this wire, you pinch it in the corner here, and you wind it around, and then you have to make sure that you cut it off at the right length here, not too short, not too long, quite precise. But that is possible. So if you open one of these motors up and these brushes are gone, like the one we looked at on the other car, which is completely corroded away, it is possible to replace these. Now I'm going to clean up the end cap of this motor, and hopefully it will run again. But while we've got this diagram, it might as well just describe putting the motor back together, which is a real pain. The procedure is, or it seems to be, I've destroyed a couple of motors trying to get them back together again, but the one that seems to be continually working for me is that these wire brushes, of course, in this position when it's all apart, they're covering the whole of the axle for the motor. So in order to get the motor back together again, we need to get them out of the way, and it's a little trick, because I saw these two holes here, which are in the end cap. You probably can't, you can see just three holes there. The centre one is the axle hole, and these two holes are the one either side of them. So the trick is to bend these brushes into, there's a little slot in each of these corners, and what you need to try and do is to bend these brushes so they sit in this slot, so that one sits in that slot, and then this one sits in the slot here. I think we'll try and draw it on. Let's have a look. It's not very well actually, but believe me, there is a tiny little slot where these brushes will sit just behind this hole. So if you can imagine, they sit in this corner here, if that makes any sense. So that goes into this position and that goes into this position, which keeps them clear of this hole. So when we put the motor back together, we put the central axle spindle through the hole, and we put the motor back together, and then when it's all fixed together, the idea is that we poke a pin through each of these two holes, which will release these brushes onto the central commutator of the motor. Now this is what we do on the scissors motor, and it's very easy on that one because we can see what we're doing. But on this one, because it's all inside, we have to go into a very quiet, dark place and listen very carefully for the slight click when we release this brush and it hits the commutator of the actual motor spindle itself. It's very tricky, but it does work. You just have to be very patient. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you find you've pushed this brush so far into this corner that the pin just doesn't release it. So it's a pain, but we have to take the motor apart again, just revisit this, try and get them into a point where it's just past this hole, or ideally across the hole. That's quite tricky. So it's close enough so the pin, when it comes through, can release the brush inside. Hopefully that makes sense. And I've had to draw this diagram. Everything is so tiny, but it is possible, and I've done it 4 or 5 times now. So I'll show you how to put the motor together, but you won't possibly be able to see much. But that is the principle of what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my end cap of the one that stopped working. I'm going to put it into the cleaning solution that we've got, or the same cleaning solution as I'm using for the chassis, which is the Viacal limescale remover, and hopefully that's going to make this motor work again, but we'll see. So in a few minutes we'll be able to see if the motor actually works.